one of the things I often come up against is this idea of sort of revolution versus transition. A lot of people would quite like there to be no more oil produced tomorrow, right? They'd like everyone to drive electric cars tomorrow. Well, you and I know that can't happen because there aren't 30 million electric cars sat around waiting for new buyers yet. But B, we've got to transition all of these supply chains. The food that we all go and buy, delivered in diesel trucks to the supermarket, all of that's got to have time to transition. And it unfortunately, it can't all sort of turn on a sixpence.
My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show Plus podcast. That's a very important title. I sometimes get it wrong. And unusually, in fact, for the first time since February last year, 2020, I'm sitting outside in a lovely garden at the offices of BP Pulse in the sunshine with a man I consider my EV guru, but certainly he is an EV guru within the realms of BP Pulse, is Mr. Tom Callow. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much. Yes, it's my first. I put in the sat nav this morning to go to work. And I thought, this is really odd. This is my first trip to to work for months and months. And I did come here for a little bit during the months where we could go to work. But it's so
you've been working at home then?
Yeah, the home has been home has been my work and work has been my home. So which I think for a lot of people that's been really challenging to have that balance of no separation between the work and the home life. So
this is very confusing, and it has been a long period of time. But this is so lovely to take advantage of this. BP Pulse headquarters in Milton Keynes, which thankfully is where so many car companies. So we've just recorded an episode about a car this morning for the main channel. And so it was so near Tom's office, I went, can we do a podcast at your office? Which worked, which is great.
Yeah.
But no, so the thing, can you do a brief history of how Chargemaster became BP Chargemaster and then became BP Pulse? Because it's quite, because you were involved with it when it was Chargemaster.
Yeah, I came from the Chargemaster side of the business, and actually I'd known the business since it was founded, so I knew the founder very well. And not a lot of people know this, but the origins of Chargemaster actually was a company which I think you'll remember called the Electric Car Corporation, which was converting little Citroen C1 to electric. So that actually was what...
now you say, I absolutely remember, because I remember test driving one. And it was quite...
And it actually, I've got a road test at home of it as a kind of a bit of, sort of posterity, and it actually beat the incumbents in the market from Mitsubishi and Smart. It was rated, I think it was Autocar Auto Express, said it was a better car at the time. And that was why really the founder started doing it, because he thought there was a gap in the market, and then quickly realised that he saw cars like the Nissan Leaf coming, and really quickly realised that the OEM, the mainstream vehicle manufacturers, were going to just get this stuff in the market very quickly, and pivoted to infrastructure. Right. So Chargemaster, as it sort of became in terms of infrastructure, was founded in 2010. So had nearly a decade-long run before it was acquired by BP in 2018. So BP acquired the business. It's wholly acquired in 2018. It then became BP Chargemaster.
Right.
And we had this sort of slight difference with the Polar Network, as it used to be called. So we had our main public charging network was called the Polar Network. And it had a different brand for various reasons, but don't need to go into that. But ultimately, what we did at the tail end of last year was sort of reveal the BP Pulse brand, which is now the name of the business. So I work for BP Pulse, and the public charging network is BP Pulse as well, just to try and simplify things, because we were very aware that there were lots of different brands under Chargemaster, Polar, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's sort of, I think it also marked a sort of a new period of time for this business as we pivot towards some really exciting and different things that I don't think people would have expected Chargemaster to be doing, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, because that is I think that the reason I wanted you to do that history was for people who don't know, and I'm coming across this more and more now, people whose first electric car in comparison with the first ones I had are so brilliant.
200-mile range, I mean,
there's bitterness on my part.
Yeah, I was thinking on the way up here, so when you and I first met, I think there must have been about 100 electric cars on UK roads, right? In 2009, 138 registered at the end of that year. So probably 100 electric cars, and we were chewing the fat about EVs and how this market was going to play out, and now we're at over half a million or whatever. Just phenomenal market growth. And I don't think it's funny, you talk about that, because I think from an infrastructure point of view, I think Rachel McLean, the Transport Minister, said this quite recently. That we have a good infrastructure base in the UK. It's good. It's not perfect. We have good infrastructure in the UK. But if you rewind to when you and I started driving EVs, it was in some of it was okay, but some of it was terrible, or it was the coverage was terrible. I mean, I remember I had a BYD electric car on test from our friends in China, and I was driving it. I was doing a demonstration of it. I was taking it to my mum's teacher and taking it to primary school to show some primary school kids an electric car. And I was taking it to my secondary school, which is in Dartford, and we lived down in Kent. And I had to drive it about 20 miles down the M2 just to get it charged. Right. And then turn around and come the 20 miles back again, just because there wasn't a charge. And you think that just doesn't happen today, No. So that was obviously I had to have a membership and an account and all this sort of stuff, which you don't need today. So it really is a different world to 10 years ago. Well,
I mean, because I think when I had a Mitsubishi i-MiEV in 2009, and I don't want to go on about how it was in the old days too much. This is a reminder to myself. But then, as far as I knew then, and I could have been wrong, but I think I'm right, the only rapid charger in the country was at Mitsubishi's headquarters, and 9 times out of 10 it didn't work. So I deliberately drive to Cirencester, which is 35 miles from my house, to plug it in the rapid charger, which then didn't work. Then I had to get back in, hoping that I would have just about enough range in that car.
I think we had something like 15 rapid chargers dotted across the UK in 2014. Right. It was this kind of middle belt of England network that was created with some.
Is that all that you had there, even then?
I think so. Yeah, it was something like that. It was something like 15 to 20 chargers across the middle of England, and then we really ramped up in sort of the late 2010s. Right. We've got over 700 rapids now, and we're aiming to have about that number of ultra fast chargers by 2025. So it's just a different world, and I think there's a lot in the media. Well, there's a lot said about how bad infrastructure is, but actually I think it's pretty good actually, and I think that there is always room for improvement, and no one and certainly we don't sort of rest on our laurels and think everything's perfect and we don't need to innovate, we don't need to change anything. But it's pretty good actually. It's not as gloomy as people might make it out.
And it's also, I think, that thing which is frustrating in a way, it must be for you, I would imagine, is that there's all these new cars coming out, and there is a sexiness to new cars. I must admit, I'm getting more and more immune to it, but I do get it. I understand it. When we put an episode out about a car, it will just automatically get a load more views than if we do some other technology. Generally, that's the general rule. But what's happened with chargers is they've got faster, more reliable, more solid, easier interface. They work better. They last, all those things. That's actually been happening to chargers, which is something people don't think about. That's happened to chargers as well as as the cars. And we and quite rightly the cars probably are the stars in a way, and they take the lion's share of all the interest in a sense. But that goes back to again there was something like 9 electric vehicles I think on the market in 2010 or something. I mean or a bit later there were hardly any. There was just a handful, and now there's almost like 9 new ones every month almost. And I think I think that sort of that improvement in the infrastructure has definitely gone probably a little bit unnoticed. But as I say, it's really we've particularly led the market in things like sort of fast charge. I say fast, rapid sort of DC charging in the UK. I mean, the UK is in a really strong position when it comes to DC charging and being able to sort of access DC charging around, out and about. And I think that's there's so much sort of positive there. And I think when you hear things like EV infrastructure is a problem for adoption, when you sort of dig into that and say, well, where's this coming from? Or the survey, it's a survey that said lack of EV infrastructure is holding people back from buying one. You think, but is that a lack of infrastructure, or is that them not knowing what there is? I mean, I always quote the example of I don't wear glasses. I genuinely don't know where my local optician's is, but I assume if I did, I would suddenly be aware of it and henceforth know it, and it wouldn't be a problem anymore, and that would be fine. And it's actually not. It sounds a sort of stupid analogy, but it's not. It's not really, because the average consumer uses an average of 1 forecourt, right? Fill up with petrol, diesel, right?
And it stands to reason that the average private motorist is probably going to use, let's say, one or maybe two public charge points.
Right.
Or as I say, on average, some
Yeah.
some drivers that you and I know about, a private motorist truck all over the place. But most people won't. Most people have quite boring car routines, right?
Yeah.
They drive them 20 miles a day. If they need public charge, then they may well fill up at a sort of one charger quite often.
Yeah.
So I think this is the sort of thing that you sort of see the market expanding, but a lot of it's just education. A lot of it's just to do with people not knowing what's out there, or people not knowing how it works, or having a fear of it. And reading, 5-year-old, and that's the problem. If you read an article online that's even 3 years old, it's probably wildly out of date.
Oh God,
now,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So that's also an issue, I think, is just that consumer awareness and education is a massive, massive factor that most people don't spend a lot of time talking about, and that applies to the cars just as much as it does to the chargers.
I mean, you can really tell the people if I see a comment from someone who is up to speed with what's happening now, it's a completely different flavour to a comment from someone who's seen a post or an episode of ours and go, yeah, well, the infrastructure's not up for it. That exact term. Or they're powered by coal. Well, no, they were 10 years ago, 40%. Now it's less than 1%.
Yeah. Or it always takes 4 hours to charge your car.
It's always 4 hours.
It can take 4 hours.
I can't spend 4 hours waiting for my car to charge. Well, don't then. But I mean, although that's in effect both our jobs. A lot of that is to do with that. Not deflecting that, but explaining that, or trying to, because it's such a hard thing to explain. I still haven't worked out how to do it to people who've never driven one.
Yeah.
That it's not like having a petrol car, and it just is different, and you'll charge it in a different way. I mean, the fact that now, because you're a very nice colleague of yours, I said, I don't really need to charge you. Well, go on, you may as well. So I plugged my car in here, but I'm not waiting for that car to charge.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, I think that the thing I always try and explain is that charging is going to be different for different people, and almost different for everyone, if you like, in the sense that there will be some people who will only ever charge at home and exclusively charge off peak and all that sort of stuff, and there'll be some people who exclusively charge on public chargers and almost exclusively charge on really fast ones potentially. So if you want an electric car to kind of replicate the forecourt experience of always charging really fast, plenty of people will do that, and plenty of people have that experience, but it's not going to be for everyone. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think that people who aren't involved yet and are trying to kind of get their heads around the sector have to understand is that it's just, there will be differences and there will be this variety, and that's good. That's good for the grid. We all know that it's good for the grid to have that level of sort of difference. It's good for the consumer to have that level of choice as well. So that yes, you'll have your charger that's 300 kilowatts or 150 kilowatts that can charge, let's say, 100 miles in 10 minutes or thereabouts, or even more. But that's if you don't need that, that's fine, because there'll be other options. So if you want your really, really uber fast filling, that's great. We can offer you that. But if you want to sit and charge on a 7 kilowatt post like these ones, then that's fine too. Or charge at home. And I think people have a hard time because everyone, if you fill up a petrol diesel car, everyone who does that does it in the same way, right? In the same place. It's called a forecourt, and you use a pump and whatever. But because there is that variety in EV charging, I just think it's difficult for people to understand that that's okay, and it doesn't have to be this homogenized culture where everyone either charges at home or everyone charges really fast or whatever. It's going to be this sort of quite nice, delicious blend of things that actually, when you knit it all together, has a lot of benefit for for DNOs and the grid and so on. That actually there is that variety. And as I said, if everyone charges at home, we know there's going to be problems with that if everyone tries to charge at home, and indeed obviously we know there's 40% of people can't do that probably. And if everyone wanted to charge at 300 kilowatt speeds, there'd also be an issue, because we couldn't generate sufficient power, I suspect, to do all of that charging for 32 million cars in the park. So the fact that you've got this nice balance is good.
Because then, I mean, have you noticed then an increase in charger use? Because that's certainly something I remember talking to different charging companies, and they go, well, everyone's going, there's not enough charging. This is only used 5% of the time. But has that increased?
We're seeing tremendous growth in utilisation, but we're still very open about the fact that capacity is still enormous. So we're seeing chargers relative to last year. I mean, we're already well up on 2020 usage levels, and we're only we're literally sort of today coming out of lockdown. So we're already up on that significant on last year's numbers. But there's still lots of capacity and headroom in the network as it stands. So you might have chargers today that are some of our most used chargers, and they're still probably available in terms of their time, about 50% of their time.
Right.
And in terms of more importantly, the amount of energy they could be delivering if they were working at sort of maximum speed, as it were, or maximum speed for a longer period, not all the time. they're probably only kicking out 10 to 20% of the total energy they could deliver.
Right.
And obviously that's a mixture of the vehicle part not all being ultra fast charging capable, etc. So yeah, there's massive capacity, and as I say, when someone says that sort of slightly lazy line to me, well, there's not enough infrastructure, I always try and just gently push back and say, what do you actually mean by that? And they say, well, there's nothing where I live. And then you sort of take them onto ZapMap or whatever and zoom in, and they go, oh, well, I didn't. And it's the optician's analogy again. Oh, I didn't know that was there. Oh, there's 2 rapid chargers at a garage. I didn't know that. And you think, well, why would you? You drive a diesel car. Why would you need to know? And then if they say, well, there isn't enough in Wales, you think, okay, well, there are going to be areas that need addressing, and the Welsh government's got an EV strategy.
Wales and Norfolk.
And there's absolutely going to be, there isn't a complete perfect geographic balance of chargers today, but that's because of the history of how charging networks developed, etc. But it's also this point that we're going to need a sort of a fair distribution of chargers around the country, an equitable one. But it's not going to be even, if that makes sense. So you will inherently need much more charging infrastructure in central London than you will in the remote part of Wales, the remotest parts of Wales or the Scottish Highlands. Just that there will be more need for it. So it's got to be equitable, and you've got to make sure there's charging infrastructure for the people that need it. But it's okay that there's going to be more in, all the stats that always show, there's too much in London. Well, there's going to need to be a lot in London. Right?
Potentially could be quite a few cars in London. But then, so the other thing there's 2 other really key things that fascinate me. But the first one, I think, is how it becomes a profitable business, because certainly in the early days I remember coming to sort of events where there would be a charger unveiled, and then you heard how much that charger cost, and then how much it cost to put it in, and then you work out how the percentage they were expecting it to be used, incredibly low, and then you go, that's not going to make any money for this company. How is that happening? But I'm assuming now, by the stage you got to here with BP Pulse, that there has to be a profitable horizon that you can see that yes, it will make money in the end, and we can maintain it and expand it and all those things.
Absolutely, and BP's been very clear about that in terms of its whole transformation strategy.
Because that's the other thing I want to talk to you about.
And it's I mean the sort of what BP describes as moving from being an international oil company, an IOC, to an integrated energy company, an IEC.
Right. So
energy is is, if you like, the new frontier, and I guess it always has been, because that's what oil and gas creates. But it's all about the energy. So actually, this is one of the reasons why my head is much more geared towards kilowatt hours and capacity and working out. So when someone says, well, how many charge points do we need? I say, well, how much energy do we need actually? Because we know how many cars there'll be roughly. We know how many miles those cars will drive, because we're all boring, and mileage hasn't really increased in the last 10 years. In fact, it's gone down slightly. So we know that what the average mileage is likely to be. So therefore, can we extrapolate that to say how much energy we'll need and work it backwards from there? There's no point in we need 3 million charging points. It's a redundant figure. We absolutely see a pathway to profitability, and obviously some of the charges we've got in the ground are used to the extent today where that's probably already possible, and some are clearly in low utilisation areas where it's going to take longer.
I'm just going to explain the background sounds you can hear now are in fact a drainage company that we were praying would not start up their machinery, but they have. But it's actually not. That's not too bad. If it doesn't get louder than that, that's okay. But just so if you can hear that, if you can't hear it, I'm very happy. But then, so that is really, I think, fascinating. So I'm going to mention a competitive company, but Shell and BP globally seem to be the 2 oil companies that have gone beyond greenwash in terms of their commitment to expanding their energy delivery portfolio. There you go. I think I've been listening to too many corporate press releases, but that it doesn't feel token anymore. What you're doing here with BP and what Shell are doing with their chargers, it is actually, that's a serious economic. Now, it's a serious economic commitment for electric cars in terms of their global spend on research for searching for oil and gas and all those things. It's very modest. But it strikes me as it's not just placating some moaning minis and do-gooders.
Absolutely not. I mean, seeing where the transition. I think people recognise there is an energy transition, and there's a transition to different forms of transport. And if you want to be involved in, perpetually involved in that transport future, you've got to sort of move towards the forms of energy that are going to power it, right? So that makes total sense. And I think one of the things I often come up against is this idea of sort of revolution versus transition. And, if you, a lot of people would quite like, there to be no more oil produced tomorrow, right? They'd like everyone to drive electric cars tomorrow. Well, you and I know that can't happen because there aren't 30 million electric cars sat around waiting for new buyers yet. But B, we've got to transition all of these supply chains. The food that we all go and buy, delivered in diesel trucks to the supermarket, all of that's got to have time to transition. And it unfortunately, it can't all sort of turn on a sixpence. So I think there's got to be this transition. And I think that's almost where most of the discussion now is it's about how quickly can that happen in a realistic way that's not people, that's not anyone dragging their feet or anyone sort of being forced to move in a way that's just going to, not be viable. And I don't mean that's not necessarily about being. It does mean profitability ultimately, but it's about just viability. And how quickly can it happen? I think that's where the debate is at the moment, really.
Yeah. Because it is the more you get into it. I haven't, in the last 10 years, I haven't thought, there's less to change than I thought. So I think 10 years ago I didn't even think about it because it's such a colossal topic. I couldn't even see it. And in that intervening 10 years, I've come to understand the sheer scale of how reliant the human race is on fossil fuels at the moment. That's what's built our, the world you and I grew up in, absolutely built on fossil fuel energy.
It's a supply and demand. It is. I hate to boil it down to that, but it's just simple supply and demand, isn't it? It's if there's no demand, then something won't be supplied.
Yeah.
So you've got to sort of address both and do it in a balanced way. But I think that is absolutely a challenge we recognise. And there's, I guess, from some people's point of view, might be some truths that they're uncomfortable with about the fact that actually you might see certain things increase, demand for certain fuels increase before they decrease, because there are parts of the world that are still developing at a stage that the UK has already been through decades ago. So it's a really tricky balance, and I think that's one of the things that's I've appreciated certainly in the last sort of 2-3 years is how complicated the global energy system is so complicated and so so massive, and that it just is going to take time to transition. But I guess what you're seeing though is this consensus around the destination,
the need
right?
to change it.
There's a complete consensus around the destination, right? So, there's, I think, there are three things I think that we, I've seen before, certainly in sort of, in presentations about, and what we say publicly is, there's the kind of, the Paris Agreement, and there's the statement that, the world's on an unsustainable path, and the fact that we've got to do rapid action to move quicker towards transition. And they're all things that you could find BP agreeing with as much as you could find, Friends of the Earth agreeing with it. But because and I think the world has got to this point now where it feels to me anyway, and this is probably really glib, but it sort of feels to me like we all know where we need to go. It's now this question of how, this is what we're all beavering away on day to day, right? It's how quickly can we get there? And I'm sort of, it's a dramatic example, I suppose, but even if you look at that free wire charger outside, that is a sort of an answer to how quickly can we get there in a way, because it's saying if we want to put ultra fast charging in areas where we can't get the grid capacity today, is there another way to do it? And then there might be, and there is in fact. So there's all this sort of work going on and frantic peddling behind the scenes that I think people don't realise. It's been it's what faster growing sector could we be in at the moment than electric vehicles and
it's very hard to imagine. Because even, maybe 20 years ago, you could say the tech sector, the internet and all that stuff was this sort of experienced explosive growth, but not now. And this is really, it is future energy. So renewables and electric vehicles and the infrastructure required, that is going through cataclysmically. Because I do want to talk about that because that's the first time I've seen it. But so what's it called?
It's a free wire. Free Wire's the company. It's a US-based company. And it's called their Boost charger. So it's a static ultra fast charger, but it requires a very modest grid connection. So you're talking sort of from memory, I think it's about 20 kilowatt grid connection. But it can output 100
slightly above a domestic one.
Light exactly.
industrial.
So you're talking 120 kilowatt output with ultra fast charging because it's got a 160 kilowatt hour integrated battery. So we took out a 50 kilowatt charger to to put that 120 kilowatt charger down, and we could have put more. We could have put potentially another one, but there's capacity there, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's actually using less capacity
so
than
it's 160 kilowatt hour. Because just for listeners, because I'll take a picture of it so you can see it. But it's much bigger than your average rapid charger that you might find on a motorway or wherever. And so I saw this massive, great thing. Well, it's not massive, but it's like telephone box scale, isn't it? So it's just a chunkier lump of stuff. But then a huge lump of it is 160 kilowatt hour battery.
I mean, if you look, so if you imagine what two of those would look like on a forecourt, you've got these two very large sort of, I think they're about, are they 1.5 metre square boxes? But, they're, as you say, telephone boxes are about analogy in terms of their overall size. You can have two of those on a forecourt on that, both delivering 120 kilowatt output. Yeah. To get to, let's say, 150 kilowatt chargers, which is what we've already got on a lot of forecourts, although the actual unit that you interface with as a user is quite
smaller,
slim, what you see, or you might not see and you might ignore, but is associated, is you look to the left or the right and you see two big power cabinets with loads of power modules in, and they're about the size of a phone box each. And then you see the the LV, low voltage panel on the forecourt, big GRP enclosure. Oh, and then you see the substation, and you're like, whoa, okay, hang on. So actually, when you add it all together, you've probably got 4 to 5 parking bays worth of kit to deliver to ultra fast chargers. Whereas that obviously is, although the unit's bigger, the actual footprint for the installations is so much smaller. So there's a real promise in that technology. And as I say, there's probably quite strong alignment between the areas where you could have a need for ultra fast charging, but not the grid connection sort of capacity yet, or sort of economically not viable costs, and the areas where utilisation probably won't be huge yet. Yeah. Which is kind of the sweet spot, because that we sort of see modelling that will do maybe sort of 20 cars a day on charging of that device on sort of average usage sort of demands, and we're seeing our most used ultra fast chargers and indeed rapid chargers doing about 30 cars a day at the moment in London.
Right.
And that's great. I mean, we've seen companies that are saying they're only getting 1 or 2 charges per day, but our chargers are doing sort of 30-ish per day on the ones in London at least.
Right.
So for applications like our most used sort of hub at the moment, those units might not be appropriate, because actually they might be kicking down to their sort of their 20 kilowatt supply, and the battery buffer might be depleted too often. Yeah. But for a lot of other applications, they're going to be so useful.
But also, I'm assuming that the economics of it as well, because if the one thing I've learned very noticeably having batteries in my house is that if I can buy electricity very cheaply and use it when it's expensive, I do this thing called saving money. I have to spend so much money on electricity, which presumably you can do with that as well. You can if it's not too busy, you can go, well, you can tie it in with the grid variation. You charge it when it's cheaper, and
we could certainly see that sort of coming in the future in terms of the sort of integration with the grid and sort of the flexibility in pricing. Yeah. I mean, I think the almost sort of the most interesting point in it is actually the fact that it can move as well. So if if you install an ultra-fast charger, you've brought in that grid connection to a site, a traditional sort of ultra-fast charger with a full grid connection. You've brought in that connection to that site. If you, for some reason, then need to move it or take it away, if the site, if the site gets sold and repurposed for something else, you can't take that grid connection with you, right? No. That grid connection is almost literally a sunk cost in terms of being in the ground. But with that boost charge, I mean, you can literally just stick high ab it up onto the back of a truck and drive away, and you've obviously only got a very small grid connection that you've sort of had to go off. So
I would assume laying a cable in that can supply that is cheaper than laying.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the installation costs are lower, but the sort of, if you've got a site that that you might be moving, or for example, one of the sectors that's in my mind going to be hardest to electrify is almost challenging to electrify. It's sort of really busy sort of depot fleet applications where there are already great examples of people who have put overnight sort of slower charging in depots to great success.
Right.
People like Sam Clark, when he was sort of pioneered Newt Cargo, putting that sort of smart charging in the depot, absolutely great solution for vans that are going sort of return to base. If you've got a busy solution where you're going to need lots of very fast charging in a depot sort of scenario, we've got people coming and going but needing quick charge and then they're off again, that can be quite challenging, particularly if you don't own that site, because a lot of these could be a leased depot, right? It's sort of patch of land somewhere. But if you're having to charge vehicles there, and you don't want to put sort of £2 million grid connection if you've only got 5 years left on your lease and you're going to get booted 3 miles up the road afterwards. But if you can deploy a fast charging solution, an ultra fast charging solution that you can then take with you with a limited sort of sunk cost, that's really attractive.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a huge market for that sort of technology. And it's not obviously the only sort of game in town, if that makes sense. But this is what we're trying to do: is address those knotty issues of, we now had to roll out rapid chargers. We've got ultra fast chargers going now. How do we tackle the other challenges in this sector? How do we deal with the issue that there's pockets of the country that have got a lower amount of charging than they might need in the next 5 years, whereas other areas are probably pretty well served at the moment. I've seen lots of comments, people saying, Milton Keynes has got far too much infrastructure, it's got way more than it needs. If you look around, it's really well utilised. So actually, you might think that, but actually, what it's done, and you look at the statistics will back this up, is it's helped EV adoption. Of course, it comes back to the point about not enough infrastructure, right? Yeah. If you see it and you see other people using it, you're more likely then adopt yourself because you see the opticians, right? That's
a really good analogy, because I definitely never knew there was such a thing as an optician until I needed to wear glasses.
I've had people
very aware of it.
I've had people approach us, when we're doing I don't know, the electric vehicle experience centre that we've got here in Milton Keynes, and we've been doing film. In fact, I think it was filming with you, and a couple came up and we said, well, can we just ask you why you got an electric car? And they said, well, I just kept seeing people plugging them in all over the place in Milton Keynes, so I thought I should get one. It was this very absorbing behaviour where you sort of see someone else doing it. It's not word of mouth. It's it's just people reflecting someone else's actions.
I saw people plugging them in. That's the best line ever.
But this is when you make it prominent, and people will suddenly think, hang on, what are you doing there? And you've, I'm sure, had it millions of times where people coming up to you and saying, is that electric? And probably making some either they're really interested or they make some nice quip about, bet it takes you 5 hours to charge, or you're going to be here a while, aren't you? But there is this huge level, and you see this in all the statistics that people like Auto Trader put out, or whatever. It's massive level of interest in EVs, as your own channel will say. I'll always remember the first Fully Charged Live event you did, and we asked a question now in that panel session I did, where I said, can I just say who already has an electric car? And I was expecting 80% of the audience put their hands up. And it was like 20% of the audience put their hands up. So vast majority of people there were sort of looking and if you like, shopping or out to see. Yeah. So there is this fast consumer interest, and you've just got to make it easy for people to make the switch, attractive, obviously. And today, that's not just about saving money, because the end game of this is the environment, right? That is the end game for all of us, is the environmental impact of this. The fact that you can save money today, I always say, is a bonus.
Yeah.
I as an individual, and you've got to look at things like the tax regime. I personally do not expect to be necessarily paying any less in 10 years' time than I did, let's say, 5 years ago, whenever I was driving a diesel. I just think there'll be an equilibrium, right? So I will be charged the sort of prerequisite amount for driving my electric car all over the country,
well,
as I should be.
It does have an impact on it. It has less impact on our lungs, but it has an impact on the roads get worn out.
And I think that's just about a sort of a fair and balanced approach. Yeah. So the fact that it's probably never going to be as cheap, in my view, to drive an electric car as it is today, or was yesterday, or was the day before that. So when people say, "Well, I'm going to hang on a bit," I think, "Well, that's fine." But it's actually a great time to buy one. Obviously,
every litre of diesel you're buying now is about 200 miles in your electric car. No, way more than that, actually. What am I even saying? Yeah. Well, it depends how. It also depends how you charge it. But then, because I always have to remind myself that our listenership as well as our viewership is very international. And we've definitely been sort of focused on the UK market at the moment. But I think the key thing that you're doing things like that, the charger with the batteries, that's a universal. That could roll out all over the world. And that isn't you're not manufacturing.
No, so FreeWire is a company. Actually, FreeWire is a company that has an investment from BP's Ventures arm. So years ago,
so there is a link.
Effectively, years ago, BP's Ventures arm invested in FreeWire because it saw the potential of the technology, and this is almost a sort of this is part of the sort of fruition of that, I suppose. It's a separate company with albeit with a BP investment. Yeah. So they're manufacturing the units. So that's come from San Francisco.
Right.
And again, we believe strongly, obviously, in trying to produce onshore as well, and we've got our 50 kilowatt production line in here, for example, which we'll show you once we can get back to back to normal. It's.
But I think the key thing I wanted just people to know about, because it should be a pattern that's copied all around the world, is the EV Experience Centre. I mean, so for people who haven't seen episodes we've done about that on Fully Charged, I mean, it is it's such a genius, it's so simple. It's such a simple, genius idea that, you walk in, you're in a shopping mall effectively, and you walk past and there's a shop that's got loads of cars in it. You're going, why is that? Why are they in that? And they're all electric and they're all different. They're not from one manufacturer. You're not selling cars. Those key things. And so that's now been going, what, 3, 4?
Yeah, it'll be 4 years,
4 years
this summer. So yeah, 3.5 years.
And it's still, I mean, obviously the last year has been, let's just pretend that didn't happen. But has it generally been a success? Is there more interest in that? Has that been?
Yeah, I mean, the primary purpose of it was to, again, help drive the adoption of EVs in the area, because obviously it's, you expect the sense to be targeting people in this locality, not in Devon or Scotland or whatever. And I think it's done that. So there's been massive interest. We've had people waiting ages to get a week-long test drive of a car because it's so busy.
So right.
And I think if you look at the statistics, I mean, everything's contributing to it in Milton Keynes, I suppose, in terms of the infrastructure as well. But you're seeing that sort of Milton Keynes tracking above the sort of national average when it comes to electric vehicle adoption, probably for fairly obvious reasons. But it was the one thing that we, as it was then, Chargemaster got together with Milton Keynes Council and we sort of sat down together and said, well, if there's something we can do that's going to boost adoption, beyond just putting infrastructure down, because we've kind of done quite a lot of that, what should we do? And this was the thing. And again, it comes back to this consumer education point. If people know, what the issues are, or people know sort of how to charge these things, how to drive them, what they're going to be like, it just changes the game. And you very rarely see someone, as you well know, get into an electric car for the first time and become anything other than more supportive of them, right?
Yes.
So you can get someone who's the most sort of po-faced skeptic, and I don't like this, I'm never going to like one of these. Get in, and they'll at least get out with a wry smile that they were wrong, right? And they might get out waxing lyrical and think I was totally wrong, and sort of go and buy one that afternoon. But they're transformative, And people, I think it's just this fear of change. People sort of fear they're going to be this terrible imposition or difference in their lives. And they go, this is great. It's spacious, it's fast, it's comfortable, it's quiet. What am I worried about? Yes. Oh, and I only do 30 miles a day, and this is a 200-mile range car, so I'm absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And I think it's just that ability to get bums on seats that's been really important. But also to have the conversation. So that sort of classic example of someone coming in and saying, well, I would get an electric car, but there's no infrastructure. The team in there will just zap straight onto a map and say, well, look, here's your town, and let me show you, sir or madam. And they will be, again, you'll get that reaction where they think, oh, okay, I didn't realise that was there. Oh, I could do that journey. Oh, I could go and visit my gran.
So that was a reaction. I've just remembered that we talked to some, I can't even remember. It was here. It was outside where all the cars are charging outside the store. And that guy got out of it, and some of your team were there to, he'd just been around I think he'd had it for kind of a couple of hours, just done a test drive. And he came out and he went, and he was grinning. And I said, oh, did you enjoy that? He said, it's just a car. Which I think that's the best description.
And it is. I mean, I think, and I there's been other centres a bit like the EV Experience Centre, I think, pop up around the world, and I think other people have got this idea that they are a good idea to have this sort of education hub. I mean, I guess it's a case of, it'll be interesting to see what we see, beyond that. I mean, it's a 5-year project, the Experience Centre, right? So it'll be interesting to see what we see beyond that, not just in Milton Keynes, but around the world in terms of will we see, for example, manufacturers doing their own, where they're much more focused on that. I'm not, because we've seen that sort of approach from other brands doing the kind of, the rock car model in the past about, that sort of boutique-y shop, go in and sort of browse rather than feel like you're being sold to. But it's more than that, it's about education.
Yeah.
So you're actually almost creating these little education sort of awareness hubs for people to come in and find out and hopefully do a test drive and then get,
I think it is critical, because I would, as a ordinary punter that doesn't know anything, to go into a store like that where there's not someone from VW or any Ford or anyway, I'm not gone into a car showroom that's one brand. I've gone into a shop where they talk about electric cars and you look over there and there is a VW. Oh, that's VW. And you look there and there's a Porsche or there's a Skoda,
but it's
or
also
whatever it is.
that bit. It's getting people that, I mean, we've got plenty of car dealerships around the country, so it's not about sort of replicating what they're doing.
Yeah.
But it is about, I think we do need a better sort of standard of consistency and sort of awareness among that community as well, but then being the conduits, right? I mean, BMW did that with their sort of iGenius program, etc. I think I'm right in saying this, and Ben Fletcher, I know you know well as well. When he was at Renault, I think told me this, that the best performing Renault Zoe dealer in the country, who sold the most Renault Zoes, did it because he put everyone in a Renault Zoe.
Yeah.
So there'd be people coming in and
going,
in saying, well, I think I'd quite like a diesel Kadjar, please. And he said, that's fine. I'm not going to disrespect your wishes. If you want a Kadjar, that's absolutely fine. But before you sign the dotted line, let me take you out to Zoe and just tell me what you think. I'm just interested. And he had so many people as a result going, why do I know I do want a Zoe.
Yeah.
And so, it's just that taking that step of, it wasn't necessarily going to earn him any more money to do that. It was just this case of he was so passionate about it and believed that people should try this technology out. And I think we'll see more of that as more and more people who are more and more of those dealers actually drive the cars themselves, because that's the other issue when you've got a limited supply, is that a lot of these dealers were having to sell the cars without necessarily becoming advocates in themselves. And I think that will change as they become more familiar with the tech and they start driving them as their own cars, right? Because then they can say, I've got one, I drive it all the time, and that's
the big difference. Because I think I've done it twice. In fact, for Renault, like a talk during one of their sales conferences. So they had all their dealerships from around the country, all gathered together like we used to in the olden days, and in one room, and they would do presentations. Then they got me just to do 10 minutes as a person that drives electric cars, and those were the toughest gigs. And I've done 20 years of stand-up comedy, which was tough, and that was easy in comparison. I mean, it was a battle to. It wasn't universal, but there was definitely. If you're in car sales and you've been in it for a long time, you are selling cars with proper engines that are proper cars with gearboxes, and then there's this newfangled nonsense that basically sounds like a vacuum cleaner, and you're not interested.
What's really interesting is I think that there's really interesting segments. So I think where that perception is changing. So the company car driver is a really good example of this, where all of the clever the incentives that were there around sort of taxation and everything else have sort of shifted company car drivers into more pure electric cars.
Right.
And as a result, their brand choices are moving, right? So you've had people going out of high performance AMG Mercedes into Teslas. You've had people going from BMW 3 Series into Kia e-Neros, quite very, very happily, because they love it. And so you've got this weird sort of brand shifting going on as well, which I think is really interesting. But obviously, as those brands bring out their own EVs, people will just organically switch to the most efficient options by and large. But I think they will just help. They're the people that are going to help drive adoption, because if they're doing 20,000, 30,000 miles a year and they've got their neighbour doing 5,000, it's sort of a bit of a no excuses scenario for them, where they say, well, I'm managing in my electric car and I'm doing, I'm crunching up and down the M1 all the time. You can do it too. So having them as sort of, again, advocates is great. And you only get that by putting more bums on seats. You only get it by putting more people into EVs and getting them to live the lifestyle. The best examples that we've seen of dealers, traditional car retail staff, execs upwards, that have really got EV, are the ones that have driven them the most, the ones that have just spent the most time in them, because they realise it's just like your example, it's a car, and it drives nicely, and it's getting to that point now where when you had the iMEV, and I drove an iMEV as well back in the day, and lots of early EVs with sort of range well below 100 miles. They did feel compromised. You felt like you were sort of
a challenge.
You sort of felt good about it, right? But you did have to do that more planning, and stop every 50 miles or whatever for a charge, and it felt like a bit of a hassle or a bit of a compromise to do it. Whereas now people are just able to get these cars that are, I would say, pretty much no compromise cars now. They don't.
They're so close.
They're going to just blend into their lifestyle, and they're not going to have to sort of dramatically adapt their day to go up and see someone or to go on a business trip or whatever. Whereas obviously, sort of years ago, they may have had to do that.
I actually year before last I drove past, it was a road in Wales, coming out of Wales, in Herefordshire. I don't know the area at all. And then I went, oh my God, I've been to that farm. And I was going, why have I been to that farm? And I was driving back from the Hay Book Festival home, and I just knew I wasn't going to get anywhere near home. And I didn't want to run out in the middle. This was in the iMEV. So I pulled into this friendly looking farm, met the guy, talked to him, drove into his barn. He had 3-phase, and I managed to find a cable that I could click. I had lots of cables, and so I clicked into his cable, and I charged them. And I had a cup of tea with them in their kitchen. It was so nice. I kept offering them money because I was so grateful they didn't want to. And I went, I've never done that. I don't do that anymore. And that was but what a massive pain in the arse. I'm not saying those were the good old days. That was a nightmare. And I just, even with that charge, only just made it home.
And I think for most people now, that and I've done this on the last. I did it when holidays seem weird now. Talking about holidays, isn't it?
Yeah.
Driving on holiday. But, I took an E-Nero down to. We live in Surrey. I took an E-Nero down to Cornwall for a family holiday, and I did went to a family wedding in Lancashire in an I-Pace from Surrey. So both well over 250 miles each way, and particularly with a young kid, the track. What I used to do in my early electric cars I drove, and you did the same, was stop to charge, right? So you would stop to charge. The purpose of stopping was to charge. Whereas now, I just charge when I'm stopped. Typically, it doesn't. The behaviour has changed.
That is the important thing.
It goes from charging when you're stopped anyway to have lunch or to go to the toilet or whatever. To from a sort of a situation where we definitely were stopping to charge. That was the. And now it's as you've very eloquently put many times before, it is the whole battery versus bladder thing now, is which will hold out first. It's a different world.
Well, I've now got to the point where I never thought I would get to, which is that I recently test drove the ID3 77 kilowatt hour long range, which isn't it's not exceptional. I've also just driven the Mercedes EQS, which is staggering, which is 400 miles. And when you're in it, you go, oh, right, this really could do 400 miles, this car, You'd have to be a bit careful. But then you realise, I don't want to do 400 miles. I want to get out of the car. I can't sit here still, concentrating, very focused on what I'm doing for that long. I need a break. And you then go, actually, I mean, 150. If your car does 150 miles on one charge in the rain when it's wet, so a realistic somewhere between 150 and 200 miles, that's honestly all you need. But it's impossible to convince people of that because it sounds like nothing if you're used to petrol cars.
Yeah, and it's mentality of everyone that people might drive a 400 mile range small petrol car, but they probably carry half a tank of fuel most of the time and always top up when they're 50% down. So same effect, right? But I agree. I mean, I think
I suppose the thing that's very relevant to this conversation is what makes you not anxious about having a 150 to 200 mile range car is when I stop, there's a charger. And it works,
it's fast.
It's fast.
Yeah. And I think that's the key difference. I was going to say. I mean, I think Audi recently said something where they were sort of suggesting that they might bring out EVs with actually less, smaller batteries and lower range in future because they have this view that actually because people don't need it, it's wasteful. And I've made this point before, and I think I riled a few people online by saying actually it's potentially more efficient rather than building a 100 kilowatt hour EV, let's say a Tesla, and I think probably because I said Tesla rather than 100 kilowatt hour Tesla, it perhaps is better sort of sustainability wise to actually build 3 33 kilowatt hour i3s, right? Because they can actually serve the same potential mileage, but actually do it in a more sustainable way that you're not sort of dumping a 100 kilowatt hour battery in a car that doesn't need it, right? So there's definitely that argument to say, it's not dissimilar from the people that drive around in sort of 3 litre diesel engines to pot to the shops. I mean, you don't need a 3 litre diesel to pot to the shops.
No.
I mean, I know there's
or a 3.5 ton SUV.
No, and consumer choice means that you can. That's fine, but you don't need it, right? And I think this is the thing: it's the same thing of just because you want it and you like it, that's fine, but you don't need it. So in terms of the range, I totally agree with you. I'm sure very few people actually need a 500, 600, 700 mile range car, even if they're possible today with certain diesel cars, for example. But the ability to charge quickly, I think, is the game changer. And I'm a nerd of many flavours, as you know, and one of those is
that's a good title.
One of those you should have introduced that. I've got loads of really old automotive stuff, right? So I've got a copy of Autocar magazine from 1899.
Wow!
And I've got
I didn't know it existed then.
Oh yeah, Autocar was founded in 1895.
Wow.
I'm going to get this wrong, but it was called The Autocar, and I'm going to get this wrong, and apologies to Autocar, Jim Holder, if you're listening, but a journal published in the interest of the mechanically propelled carriage or something like that.
Wow.
So it's so just celebrated its 125th anniversary. But I've got really old copies of that, and the same. What people forget is that people a bit like you and me, 100 odd years ago, were having to sort of fight those battles about petrol cars, right?
Absolutely.
Saying they're not. People are arguing that you should never drive one over 5 miles an hour because any car ever driven over 5 miles an hour is going to kill millions, right? So you're having to have battles around, are they safe? Is the petroleum, is the motor spirit, as it was then called, safe? Why are we switching away from horses and all sorts of other things? This doesn't seem like progress, blah, blah, blah. So all of the same arguments people going through, it's fascinating to read all the same. But, one of the things I've found in all that literature and sort of obviously one of the areas of interest to me is really early electric cars and sort of the stats around those. And you had electric cars in, genuinely over 100 years ago, 120 years ago, that could do 50 or 60 miles of range, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which seems, looking back, you think, wow, really? And you weren't looking at probably much more than that in the iMove, right? In 100 years, there was basically no range progress. But the key thing that your iMove had was rapid charging, right? So that was the key difference, is that for me, and that was probably, I look at the Leaf, and there's Mark 1 over there behind us, but the Leaf brought that 50 kilowatt rapid charging standard that suddenly meant half an hour charging times.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, okay, half an hour is, lunch and a coffee or checking some emails. Not, it's not 8 hours. That is game changing. So I think moving to faster charging has been a game changer for people in terms of adoption, for sure. And not everyone needs it all the time, but it's been a game changer.
Yeah.
And I think there's this push towards, sort of potentially, smaller batteries, or at least a sort of modest battery size, and then really fast charging, I think, is absolutely going to be the enabler. So, we've got a number of ultra fast charging sites out there today on forecourts, and we're going to be moving into new formats of ultra fast charging.
Right.
So we announced recently our program to develop ultra fast charging hubs.
Yes. Yeah.
So we are talking about 12 chargers, so 24 charging bays with sort of dual charging on the chargers.
Right.
These will be 300 kilowatt chargers as well.
And under a roof.
So we're going up to, so we get canopies as well, so 300 kilowatt under a canopy on our network, because that's where we see the sort of market going. And I think it's about moving at the right time, and moving at the right time that you're going to see good utilization. Because what you don't want to do is open there's pros and cons to doing this. Obviously, from a perception point of view, it's great, but if you open a 24 charger hub, too quickly, that's going to get underutilized. You're not really doing anyone any favors, because actually you end up with pictures of it all over the place, empty, right? Yeah. And it's the same. It's the same. Yeah. You remember these battles in the press, right, years ago, where if a public charger that had been installed was overly utilised, there weren't enough.
Yes.
And it was shame on the council, shame on charging companies for not putting enough in. And if it wasn't used enough, and they'd done an FOI request to discover it's a massive waste of money. Yeah. So you've got to get it right in terms of utilisation and the balance there. So it's about putting the right infrastructure in at the right time, because if there's no business case, then not everyone else is going to do it. So, you might be able to get a government grant to do it, but in terms of a commercial push behind it, you've got to build these things when it's sort of the right time in the market to do that. So we're seeing utilisation out at the levels where we know, we're confident that that's the right play and that's the right move. But we're going to carry on doing everything else to make sure there's that choice. So actually, you've got your local kind of retail convenience sort of forecourt with ultra fast chargers on it, and more of those. So there'll be hundreds of those. But then you'll have these hubs as well, which will be, which will serve a different purpose, and hopefully sort of, tying in with the motorway network as much as we can as well, in terms of locations that are sort of strategic along main roads.
And in terms of, the next generation, because we must wind up soon, but it's been amazing talking to you, Tom. Thank you so much. But in terms of sort of next generation technology, obviously faster. And what is interesting is it doesn't appear to shorten battery life, fast charging. In fact, in some cases, I've heard it argued it's actually positively beneficial to the battery pack in the car.
I think, we certainly always sort of defer to the OEMs on that, because it's not your area, right for them to sort of guide the consumer through it. But I think, you and I have seen plenty of evidence of there's, C2C taxis down in Cornwall, I think, who ran a Nissan Leaf, original Nissan Leafs, and they were rapid charging them twice a day, I think. They had a rapid charger at their HQ. And they were doing twice a day rapid charging, and they took them 150,000 miles and then sold them on again. Yeah. And I think, well, for me, the rest of, cars aren't made of infinite material, right? The nice shiny metal that you see around you, it corrodes over time, right? Eventually it starts to degrade, and cars actually need to go to the, recycling facilities, whatever, at the end of life. And I have this very glib line, but it's just, I think the battery's just going to outlast the cars. Yes. Right? They're not. They're going to serve second life applications or be recycled. We know they can be recycled heavily now. Before the rest, by the time the rest of the car is probably not very good anymore or not very desirable, right? I don't know what the average scrappage mileage is. I mean, scrappage is a horrible word, because we know that 90 or 95% recyclable now, cars as a whole. But the average mileage of age of vehicles that get scrapped must be 150, 200,000 miles. So easily, if you can get to that point, and then we know there's Teslas knocking around on hundreds of thousands of miles, then what's the problem?
There's one that was last year, I think, or the year before, a limo that did Los Angeles to Vegas. That had done 500,000 miles on the battery pack. It had lots of other things replaced. It had drive, motors replaced, obviously loads of tyres, brakes. I can't remember. They broke down the entire list, but it had done 500,000 miles, and then they put a new battery in it.
Yeah.
They replaced the battery, which was expensive, but actually when they compared it to, it was an equivalent size Mercedes petrol for the same period of time, it was tens of thousands of dollars cheaper.
And it's another consumer education thing around, we've got this myth, we've got this position of thinking that batteries need to be replaced because when electric cars first came out, all the car companies that had had decades, people like Bosch and Mercedes. So Bosch is a car, manufacturer, a tier one company. Them and Mercedes or Daimler, they go back. Their relationship as industrial businesses working together goes back hundreds of years. The supply chains are really sort of deep rooted, right? So all these car companies would bring out electric cars, having to work with these things called battery companies.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, hello, Mr. Battery Company. How long will these batteries last in the car that we're buying them for?
And the answer actually was, we don't know.
Yeah, well, the answer was we don't know. And what do you mean by last? Because they'll probably outlast the car. And they said, well, for a consumer, we think consumers will get to the point of acceptability if they fall below 80%. We think they'll probably not be acceptable to that. So we've got to give them sort of a period at which they will no longer be able to go over 80% of the original range. And this sort of mythical 8 to 10 year figure came out of the wash. As a kind of like, well, that's about the best we can sort of warranty it at. It's probably 20, but we don't want to get into legal trouble. So let's say 8 or 10 years, and that's where you got the headlines about you're going to have to replace your EV battery after 8 years, or if you rapid charge it, you'll need to replace it. You think, where did this all come from? But it was just that need to work out how long these things were going to last. But the ultra fast charging that we're seeing isn't creating issues. We had we had sort of vehicles that we owned. We had a Model S Tesla that did about 160,000 miles in 4 years, and was driven by all and sundry and supercharged all over the place. We bought I think in 2018 we bought a 3-year-old i3 that had done 99,000 miles in 3 years, and it was sweet as a daisy. I drove it home, absolutely fine. And I had, as an i3 driver at the time, it did exactly, it was a 60 amp hour model, but it was 80 miles of range. It was absolutely fine. You thought, what's everyone worried about?
No, it is great, isn't it? I suppose the other thing I was thinking about was greater utilisation of vehicles. So that was one of the early things I learned when I started asking questions and talking about electric cars, was how much we use them, and if I'd been asked, I think I'd have said, like really little, like 50% of the time, not knowing it's actually 90% of the time we don't use them. And it's that there is that resource with electric vehicles, like all the ones in this car park. We're sitting next to a big car park full of cars, and none of them are being driven, none of their engines are on. If they were all electric and they're all plugged in, and you could use 1 kilowatt hour from each car to run this building.
We've got there. We've probably got about 100 kilowatt hours of battery in that little
just
run
in
there,
that little strip there.
of cars. So I absolutely agree, and I think that those models will emerge. Where there's much more integration between the car and the car. And the grid.
What I wanted to ask you, because you'll know this, I'm assuming that the bulk of the technology in order to enable that is in the car, will have to be built into the car.
It would have to be both. It depends if you're doing things like if you're doing proper V to G and you're actually you're doing bi-directional back to the grid. That is a different beast to doing sort of V to H or V to X. Sort of vehicle to device, if you like. So vehicle to building or vehicle to home. My gut is that V to G is probably going to be more limited as a domestic market. I think, I could be wrong, I've been before. But places like this, you could easily, if you've got sufficient numbers of vehicles, because obviously, although you can aggregate demand, of course you can. As a DNO, I'd imagine that my 60 kilowatt hours at home is a sort of a spec, and if you're trying to add up lots of 60 kilowatt hours or whatever, that's fine. But actually, if a business has 6,000 kilowatt hours sat there overnight, that's a big identifiable asset that you as a DNO can say, right, we'll have that, thanks, we'll tap into that flexibility.
I should quickly explain that DNO is a district network operator. So people who actually in the UK bring the electricity to your...
Do the pipe, do the wires around the...
do the wires, Not the national grid. The national grid run the big fat wires. The DNO run all the others.
So anyone interested in that, I think that's absolutely the case. But I think, one thing probably that the pandemic has made people sort of see is probably how little they use their cars,
How little they use their cars, exactly.
Or how little they could use their cars. And I think we'll see, possibly some sort of, consolidation of that. I think there's really interesting things happening with car subscription services, all that sort of thing. So if you go 6 months without needing a car, you can ditch it, all that sort of thing. In fact, you were quoted on Radio 4 on my drive up here, actually.
Oh,
but
right? Oh, my
I'll
God.
tell you afterwards. But you know, I think, I mean, I'm a huge fan of stuff like the Twizy. I think it'd be great to sort of see more Twizy type vehicles around, because actually, you know,
Yes.
there's as you say, there's the sort of footprint. There's the if you're running a car off renewables and there's no tailpipe emissions, and, you know, and you're genuinely doing it sort of in a way where you can trace your energy generation.
Yeah.
Well, you're kind of ticking the box of, okay, energy wise, I'm pretty good here. But actually, if you're taking some mammoth vehicle to the supermarket car park, you know, it's not hugely efficient. Whereas actually, for most of my runs to, say, a local destination, a Twizy would be absolutely fine. And so I think you'll. I do wonder, because I'm not seeing a huge amount of them, but I wonder whether we'll see this sort of emergence of these smaller kind of,
Hope so.
smaller sort of second vehicle
in China,
types.
that's a big thing there. They are producing.
Because I think for a lot of people, they're absolutely fine. And you know, there are vehicles where people might need, you know, both vehicles to be a certain size, because sometimes, you know, they've got 3 kids and sometimes all the kids are in that, and sometimes they're in that one, and that's fine. You know, you've got to sort of bear in mind people live normal lives.
Yeah.
But if you just got a car that just sits there and is always transporting you, why on earth do you need it to be a 4-seat SUV?
I mean, that is, I think, the transport as a service notion, which is kind of emerging now, even as we speak. There's all these different models appearing, and it is the thing of like car sharing, because I was obsessed with car sharing until about February last year, and I went, I don't want to get in a car someone else has been in. You know, that suddenly made me rethink it. But I still think that's a very valid way of doing it. But it might be the models that some manufacturers are doing, where you buy the smallest, cheapest car that you can possibly get, that hasn't got a lot of range, and you drive that for a year and you go, this is fine. I can get both kids in the back, take the dog out, do the shopping, that's fine. We want to go to Scotland to go camping and skiing or something. Oh, okay. Bip on your phone and someone delivers a massive, fat, huge, massive capacity electric SUV with 500 miles range that cost a fortune. And you have that for 2 weeks. And then you come back in it, and then they come and take it away again, and then you're back to, you know,
I mean,
you don't need that bloody great tank.
I think one thing that obviously, you know, and consumer choice is absolutely fine. And I think one thing is that what electric vehicles enable you to do, I think, is probably is reduce your footprint of having that sort of large luxury vehicle, right? So, you know, yes, we know that there's still, you know, tyre wear, etc. But actually, you know, a lot of the stuff I've seen is suggestive that, you know, if you're braking to the same extent, fine. But actually, if you're not braking to the same extent because the car's doing that through regenerative braking and not actually pressing a pad against the disc, right?
Yeah.
Then
we're doing a big lot of proper scientific research into that whole, you know, particulates from tyres are worse than diesel. Here's a simple solution to that. No, they're not. I mean, one of the great ones I love is it's when you've got experience, direct experience over years. You go, well, I'm old. I remember how often I'd buy tyres on my petrol diesel cars. Quite often I'd wear them out. The electric cars, they don't wear out very fast. There's a clue in that, because it's a different way of the traction and everything. And obviously you can. I always remember being on a supercharger next to a guy who'd bought a P85D Tesla, and he just looked at me and he went, how long have you had those tyres? And I'm like, I don't know. And he said, well, there you go, there's your answer. These ones are 5,000 years old, look at them. And he shouldn't have been allowed on the road. They were shredded, because of course he thrashed the hell out of that car. So it depends how you drive, obviously. But
and I think, you know, there's a bit, this is also tackling the biggest sort of challenges. So, I mean, I'm sure that electrifying, for example, the taxi fleet in London has done masses for air quality in London. You know, I mean, I think in terms of, and people talk a lot about sort of social justice in this segment, in terms of, you know, what about people who can't afford EVs? And one of the things that came up, you know, on Radio 4 earlier was about sort of car subscriptions, and saying, well, a lot of people can't afford a £350 subscription. You think, well, you know, people, if you're buying a used car for £2,000, you're not in the new car market anyway, by the way. But you know, we do need to sort of address that and actually not penalise those people that just can't afford an EV. You know, the cheapest kind of, you know, cruddiest electric cars out there that have been, you know, that are well over 10 years old now, probably are still £5,000-6,000.
They're holding their value, which I think that's the curse. It gives you a clue. Oh yeah, they're actually better.
Yeah. So I think, you know, there's got to be an element of sort of protection for that. But actually, I guess the comfort for me is that the person buying the sort of £1,000 petrol car is probably not the biggest pollutant at the moment, right? No. It's probably they're probably doing, you know, 4,000 miles a year, 5,000 miles a year, whatever, and they've got a car for the, you know, car to commute, whatever. They're probably not spending They're probably not spending 1,000 miles on a car they're doing 40,000 miles a year in.
No.
So actually, I think in terms of the way the market's working and the dynamics of sort of particularly sort of targeting, say, you know, company car drivers doing. I mean, I remember my first year here, I did 35,000 miles in an i3 my first
Wow,
year.
wow.
So people like that, if I'd done that in a diesel, you can imagine what my emissions footprint would have
Yeah.
been for 35,000 miles a year versus 35,000. So targeting the right people that are actually going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
That taking one EV, taking one car, sort of ICE off the road, replacing with EV isn't an equal thing everywhere, right? There are certain things we should prioritise. So I think it's being done the right way in that sense.
And it's again that it's a difficult one because it is about patience, but that in 10 years' time, so by 2030, there's going to be second-hand electric cars available. A huge amount, so that's, which will be, because that's the thing I didn't even think about, because it was all those things we talked about brand idea. I always bought Volkswagen Golfs. I didn't even know I had brand loyalty. I just got a Golf because they worked and they were reliable. And then I suddenly got a Nissan. I've never even looked at I didn't even know what Nissan was. But because it was an electric car, I totally changed and had a Nissan Leaf, which was so, I didn't even realise I'd done it until afterwards. I went, oh God, it's not a Volkswagen, it's a Nissan. And it was great. But there was a reason I was saying that. Oh, well, because I'd never bought new cars. That's the thing. I'd always bought people talk about second-hand. I only bought second-hand when I was flash. Once I was working on telly and had a few quid, then I'd buy a second-hand car that was polished and shiny and had good tyres. Before that, they were literally semi-illegal wrecks that I always drove because I couldn't afford it. So that whole thing, I can't afford a £40,000 car. No, nor can I. No one. It's crazy that people spend that much
money.
And
I think that not only going to see cheaper electric cars. Eventually the price will come down, but also there'll probably be, they might be in better condition because obviously in terms of things like the mechanicals and stuff, you're actually buying a sort of slightly more homogeneous product in a way, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to be quite interesting to continue. But it's going to take a while. We've got the total. The total used car market in the UK on a normal year, so let's forget COVID, is something like 7 million cars a year, right?
So 7 million second-hand cars are bought.
So it's basically 3 times the size of a new car market, right?
Right.
So it's massive. The used car market in this country is massive. So think about 7 million cars a year transacted in the used car market, roughly in a normal year. We've only just got to 500,000 EVs total. Right, so you can imagine how many of the 500,000 are in the used market at any one time. Maybe half of them, whatever, max. But it's going to take a while before we make a dent in that 7 million figure of how many of that 7 million are EVs. Right, so it's going to take a while to flush through. But and I think that's where people are getting worried about is when are we going to get those cars? And you think, we will get there, but we're going to have to just allow that transition to happen and obviously not take steps that will penalise the person that really wants an EV that can't get one, because that's just fundamentally not fair, is it?
Yes,
that's not
absolutely.
That's not equitable. But I think we're on that. As I say,
we're heading in the right direction. We're heading in the right direction. Because I live in a fantasy elitist bubble of elitist privilege, I've been told on Twitter many times. I think we're probably further along that route than we actually are. I always have to kind of put the brakes on and go, no, hang on. It's just really, this is the beginning of the absolute start of the absolute just. We have moved from the start line a fraction.
Yeah,
we're not on the start line anymore. We were.
I think what's different
8
is.
years ago.
Well, I think what's different is when, and just as a bit of context to frame it, I think so before ChargeMaster was sold to BP, one of the potentials of the business could have been it could have floated, right? And it did try that. It did try that in prior years.
This is pre BP.
Yeah. So back in the day, it did look at flotations, but the community at the time, the financial community. You genuinely sort of got this response of, we're talking kind of mid 2010s, or 2015 maybe. You genuinely get people saying, well, I think hydrogen cars are going to come along quicker, and I think this is all a bit of a fad. I think what we've got now is it's definitely not a fad. Right? It's definitely been, I think the kind of, people know as I say, they know the destination. Yeah. Everyone knows where we're trying to get to now. We're all all we're doing now is all working together to try and hurry up. Or kind of expedite how we get there and how efficiently we get there, which for me is really exciting because I think it sort of makes things easy because you don't have to sort of prove a point, right? So, people say, we must be careful not to sort of like, back certain technologies or sort of pick a winner when it comes to technology. Well, consumers are doing that. They're not, that you can go and buy a 70 grand hydrogen car, I think, if you want to. I don't know, but consumers
are lease one. Certainly.
Consumers are the people that are picking the technology, not governments, not anyone else. So,
that is because we really must wind it up now. But that's one of my favourites. Was the same person that was on Twitter. He was very virulent in his own way. He was he said, he did the hydrogen is the future, and I said, I'm really glad. It's good to know that's the case, because I'm glad you know that, because I've been trying to see that for the last 20 years. I can't quite picture it, but good. And he said, well, there's no charging infrastructure. It was for your fancy battery cars, your elitist battery cars. And I went, I don't know. I mean, can you find a map that shows me where all the hydrogen refueling stuff? And then it, nothing.
Yeah, I mean,
but I mean that's unfair, because there could be.
Yeah.
And I've always said, if I'm cycling through a city and there's 500 hydrogen fuel cell trucks, buses, cars, taxis around me, I'm very, very happy.
Oh yeah.
I might get a wet arse because there's so much water on the road it'll splash up.
I mean, this is the thing, is that hydrogen. I mean, this is not. It's not like a tribal thing, right? Hydrogen is going to be absolutely critical,
vitally critical
to the future
important.
of the energy transition. Hydrogen is a completely critical fuel, but it's just about saying, well, let's make sure we use it in the right places and the right applications.
Yeah.
I think I just come down to sort of maths of it, in that at the moment it's sort of several multiples more electricity required to effectively put a bit of hydrogen in a car to go 100 miles than it is to do the same with electricity for an electric car. I think, well, let's just be efficient. Let's be, it comes back to this point about, if we're going to go into electric cars, should we all go into electric cars that only do 1 mile per kilowatt hour? Well, no. Let's try and do both. Let's try and transition to renewable energy, but then also use that energy in a renewable, because we're not transitioning to infinite renewable energy. I mean, it's renewable, it doesn't die out, but it's not. We're going to be limited in capacity, right? So let's try and use the renewable energy we get in an efficient way, rather than just sort of saying, well, it's an electric car, so big tick, basically. So
actually, I hadn't thought of that, because I know that it's about a 4-to-1 ratio of, say, you've got a wind turbine and you're taking electricity and you're splitting water and you're pressurizing it, the hydrogen, and you put it in a tank. You've got about a 4-to-1 loss. I've not actually thought of that, because I know I can drive around 4 miles on a kilowatt hour in the Tesla on a day like today. I've got to be a bit careful, but it is very doable. But if you're in a hydrogen fuel cell car, you're doing 1 mile to the kilowatt hour by definition, because that's how much electricity you would need to do that.
Yeah, and it's I think it's, as I say, I think we're going to need all. I mean, it's like charging, right? I mean, everyone says, well, you should be developing sites like this company over here is developing, whatever. We're going to need all the tools in the toolbox.
Yeah,
right? We're not. This is the thing, is I think there's nobody is sort of saying that there's going to be a one size fits all solution, or that any one sort of solution is going to be better than others. You're going to need all of the options on the table, and it's a competitive market and everything else. It's going to transition that way. So I think that's what's so exciting about it, is that we're not only in this high growth market, but it's also incredibly dynamic and competitive. We're not in a situation where the government's paying for all the infrastructure in the UK. Almost all the public charging infrastructure now is going in with private capital, private business. There's lots of really strong competitors doing really cool things. And that gives me massive hope, because I think, well, again, sort of circling back to where we started the conversation, I look back to when there were 100 cars on the road and no rapid charge, and you think, look how far we've come in 10-ish years. Imagine where we'll be in 2030.
And the actual development is speeding up as well. It's not just linear.
Oh yeah, not just more, but the speed, the pace of rollout is increasing. So it's hugely exciting time.
That's a very optimistic, uplifting, and positive note for us to end on. Thank you very much, Tom. That was really brilliant.
No, thanks very much. My pleasure.
We've gone slightly over my original target time, but that's good. And I don't want to cut anything, because it was all good. I'm just going to quickly say to all our lovely listeners, obviously, I would love you to subscribe to the Fully Charged Plus podcast if you haven't already, but you probably have, because that's why you're listening to it. But tell your mates. And if you know about Fully Charged on YouTube, then I don't need to tell you about that. Fully Charged. Oh, it's youtube.com/fullychargedshow. And also there is a wonderful website that is constantly pumped full of fabulous data, which is at fullycharged.show. So that's all. I don't want to say anything else. You're all wonderful. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Tom. Thank you to BP Pulse. And as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.